They say winter makes men honest, strips us down to the bone, leaves nothing but truth and scars to keep us warm. Looking back now, I reckon they were right. Because it was the dead of winter when I first saw her, half frozen, hair matted with ice, running like the devil himself, had teeth at her heel sand for the first time in my life. I didn't think about what was wise or safe. I just thought, don't let her die here. Funny thing is, I'd made peace with dying alone. After all those years, all those roads and empty campsites, that was the plan. A quiet death somewhere nobody would bother burying me. I never thought I'd have a reason to turn my horse toward anyone else. But life doesn't much care for the plans of broken men. The snow that morning wasn't gentle. It came sideways, biting skin, stinging eyes, howling through the pines like it had its own voice. I had holed up in a half-rotted cabin, the walls thin as prayer. I had enough wood to keep the stove burning, enough jerky to chew, and a bottle of rotgut to keep my blood thin. That should have been enough, until she stumbled out of the tree line. I remember the way her eyes found mine, wide, wild, but not pleading, not yet, like a cornered animal weighing whether to run or fight. Her dress was thin, no coat, skin gone blue at the edges, and hands shaking from more than cold. At first, I thought I was seeing a ghost. Out there, miles from any road, ghosts seemed more likely than living souls. My rifle was already in my hands. Old habit, the barrel pointed away before my mind caught up, and still she didn't flinch. Just kept moving, slow enough to show she meant no harm, but fast enough to stay on her feet. She stopped 10 paces out, snow up to her shins, breath coming in sharp, broken clouds. I opened my mouth to tell her to go, to turn back, to do anything but come closer, but the words died before they reached my tongue. Because I saw it then, the bruises, some yellowing, some fresh, marks on her collarbone and the side of her neck, a tear in the dress that wasn't from branches. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't a lost traveler. This was someone running, and then she spoke, voice flat, ragged at the edges, but steady. Please, I'll do anything. Just don't turn me in. I didn't answer, didn't lower the rifle. Truth is, part of me was already thinking about the sheriff's office 2 towns south, about the coin and thanks that might come from dragging in a runaway. But another part, the part I'd spent years trying to smother under whiskey and silence, couldn't look away. She took another step, stumbled, caught herself. Snow clung to the hem of that ruined dress. I saw the way her lips were cracked and bleeding from the cold. Her eyes found mine again, and this time there was no bravado, only exhaustion, only the faint, stubborn spark of someone who had already been told 100 times that she wasn't worth saving and still dared to hope. Don't turn me in, she said again, softer. Please. And I did something I hadn't done in years. I listened to my gut instead of my fear. I lowered the rifle. Come inside, I said. She hesitated, didn't look relieved, just wary, calculating. Then she nodded once and crossed the space between us. I stepped back, opened the door, and let her into the only warmth I had. She moved slow, careful not to spook me, like a stray dog expecting the boot. Inside, she stood by the stove, arms wrapped tight around herself. Steam rose from her dress as the ice began to melt. Neither of us spoke. I poured water into a tin cup, pushed it toward her. Her hands shook so bad she spilled some, but she drank anyway, eyes never leaving mine. I should have asked her name, should have asked where she came from, who she was running from, but the silence between us felt like the only thing holding the room together. Instead, I watched her thaw, inch by inch, watched color creep back into her cheeks, watched the tremors fade, and I thought about the years behind me, about the fights, the blood, the nights by dying fire sand, wondered why, after everything, I was still here, and why, in all that emptiness, this was the first time I felt something like purpose. Outside, the snow kept falling, thick and merciless. Inside, the stove popped and hissed, the only sound between us. After a long while, she looked up, met my eyes, and spoke again. I won't cause trouble, she said. I just need to rest. Then I'll go. Her voice was hoarse, broken in places, but under it, I heard something I recognized, the bone-deep resolve of someone who had run too far to beg anymore. I shook my head. You won't make it 2 miles in that storm. She didn't argue, didn't agree, just lowered her gaze to the cup in her hands. And in that moment, I knew whatever this was, whatever it would become, it had already begun. The fire had burned low when she finally spoke again, breaking the silence that had stretched between us like the frozen landscape outside. She didn't ask for a name, didn't give me hers, but the stories she told without words were carved into the bruises and scars that marked her scintillant testaments to a life filled with more cruelty than kindness. She was careful not to touch much. When she did, it was as if the cold still clung to her bones, making every movement heavy and deliberate. I watched her light a candle, her hands trembling, casting shadows on the cracked wooden walls, shadows that seemed to dance with memories neither of us wanted to face. I thought about all the years I'd spent riding from one godforsaken town to the next, avoiding eyes, avoiding conversations, avoiding memories that threatened to drown me. I was a man who preferred his solitude, his whiskey, and the cold comfort of an empty saddle. But here she was, fragile, yet fierce, forcing me to confront a world I had long tried to forget. She didn't talk much, but when she did, it was like peeling back layers of a story no one else wanted to hear. She told me about being sold like cattle, traded from one set of hands to another, each time hoping the next owner might be better, but always finding the same brutality. The way men saw her wasn't as a person, but as an object, a possession, a tool to be used and discarded. I could see the weight of those years in the way she moved, the way her eyes flickered away whenever I looked too long. But there was something else too, a stubborn flame of survival that refused to die out. It was raw and unpolished, but it was there. She was broken in places, sure, but not defeated. The night stretched long. We shared no words about the past or the future, only the steady crackle of the fire and the howling wind outside. I thought about the sheriff's office, the coins, the nods from the mayor, but none of that mattered anymore. Not when she looked at me like I was the first person who hadn't seen her as property or a prize to be won. I didn't know what the morning would bring, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to hand her over. Not now, not ever. Morning came slow, pale light bleeding through the frost on the windows. Outside, the storm hadn't eased. The world was a white prison, cold and unyielding. She stirred beside me, the weight of exhaustion still heavy on her face. For the first time, she asked for water without hesitation. I gave it to her, watching the way the simple gesture seemed to ease some invisible burden. Then came the questions I never expected to ask her to answer. Where do you go from here? She looked out the window, lips pressed tight, eyes scanning the endless snow. Anywhere but back, she said. I nodded, the weight of her words settling in my chest like a stone. There was no home for her anymore, no place where she was safe or welcome. So we made a choice, one that would change everything. Vedran, together. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. Two lost souls thrown into a world that wanted to break us, but also a chance, maybe the only one, to be something more than what the past had carved us into. Packing was slow, careful. She gathered what little she had in scraps of cloth, a worn knife, and the stubborn hope that had carried her this far. I saddled the horses, checked my rifle, and for the first time in years, felt something I hadn't dared to hope for: purpose. We left the cabin just as the sun began to break through the clouds, casting a weak light on the endless fields of snow. The air was sharp, biting at our skin, but we pressed on. Every step was a fight against the cold, against exhaustion, against the memories that clawed at the edges of our minds. The world outside was vast and unforgiving. Pines bowed under the weight of snow, rivers froze solid, and the wind carried whispers of danger. I kept my rifle close, eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of pursuit. She rode beside me, silent but steady. The bruises and scars told a story, but so did the way she held herself head high, hands steady, a survivor in a world that had tried to break her. Days passed like this, a blur of white and cold. We hunted what little we could, shared what little we had. I taught her how to track, how to read the signs in the snow, how to trust the land even when it felt like it was trying to kill us. At night, we huddled together under thin blankets, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of wolves. There were no promises, no vows, just two people holding on to the fragile thread of hope. But hope was dangerous, because the past doesn't stay buried. One morning, I spotted tracks near our camp. Fresh, wide, deep, not from deer or elk horse tracks. 3 sets, ridden hard, no gear, no supplies, men hunting. Men like the ones who had chased her before. I told her to prepare. We sharpened sticks, loaded rifles, and waited. They came with the wind, shadows against the snow, cold and cruel. I fired first, dropping one before the others could react. The fight was brutal and close. Bullets tore through the silence, cutting through the cold air. She didn't flinch when shots flew past her, steady and sure as if she had been born to fight. When it was over, only one man was left. The one who whistled a tune I recognized, a dark lullaby of cruelty and death. He vanished over the ridge, and with him, the worst of the threat. We sat together after, bleeding and breathing hard. I wrapped her wounds. She cleaned mine. No words. Just the quiet understanding that we were in this together now. Days later, when the snow softened and the world thawed, we found a small clearing far from roads, far from eyes. We built a cabin from stone and timber, a place to hide, to heal, to live. It wasn't much, but it was ours. She learned to make clay cups. I planted beans. We argued over the best way to salt meat and laughed at the smallest things, laughter that felt strange and wonderful after so long. We never married. No paper said we were man and wife, but the bond we formed was stronger than any law. Years passed. The scars faded, but the memories stayed. We lived quiet, simple lives, 2 broken souls who had found something worth fighting for. When I died, it was peaceful. No gunshots, no blood, just the end of a life chosen. She buried me beneath the tallest tree on our land, marking the grave with a stone she carved herself. It didn't say much, just one line. He chose to spare me, and I chose to live. And she did, every day after, in sunlight, in silence, in strength. They say the road teaches you who you really are. I'd always believed that was nonsense, made up by men who'd never ridden past the county line. But days turned into weeks, and every mile of snow-crushed earth, every dawn that found us still breathing, taught me something I'd spent a lifetime refusing to see. That the ghosts I carried weren't as heavy when someone else shared the load. After we left the cabin behind, the road became less a betrayal and more of a test. Snow that reached our knees, rivers half frozen but waiting to swallow horse and rider whole, winds so sharp they peeled the skin raw, and through it all she rode beside me. No complaints, no tearsomely quiet determination etched into every line of her face. I'd catch her staring sometimes, not at me but at the horizon, like she was trying to convince herself it really existed. Other times, I'd wake in the dead of night to find her sitting by the dying fire, turning something over and over, in her hands a small iron pendant cracked at the edges. She never spoke of it, and I never asked. Some stories aren't ready to be told. The road gave us no mercy. We face hunger, first real hunger, the kind that hollows your bones and darkens your thoughts. We rationed what little we had, dried meat gone hard as wood, a handful of beans that barely softened over the fire. There were days we ate nothing, riding on the ache in our bellies and the stubborn hope that tomorrow might be kinder. Then came sickness. One dawn, I woke shivering so violently my teeth clattered like dice in a cup. The fever burned through me, turning the snow into wavering shapes and shadows that whispered lies. I remember a voice cutting through the haze, calm and sure, telling me to drink, to stay awake, to breathe. For 2 days, I hovered on the edge, and in those blurred hours, I saw flashes of the man I had been, younger, angrier, quicker to raise a fist than to lend a hand. And through it all she stayed, fed the fire, wiped the sweat from my brow, whispered words I only half heard but felt all the same. When I came back to myself, the first thing I saw was her face, pale with exhaustion, but her eyes bright with relief. That was the moment I understood. I wasn't riding for me anymore. I was riding for her too. She never asked why I chose to help her. But sometimes, in the hush between wind gusts, I found myself telling pieces of my story. Of the town I left behind, the father whose belt left marks that never fully faded, the brother buried on a hillside I'd never seen again, of the fight that ended a life and sent me running west with a bullet lodged under my ribs, a bullet I could still feel twist when the cold settled deep enough. She listened without judgment, only silence and the quiet respect of someone who knew what it was to be defined by scars. And though her own story came out in fragments, names whispered like curses, places she refused to name, I pieced it together. Sold at 12, passed from hand to hand, each man believing he owned a part of her soul. But the truth was, none ever did. Bruised, battered, nearly broken, yes, but never owned. Nights under the open sky became our confession booth. The stars felt like distant witnesses, cold and indifferent, but somehow honest. I told her how I'd once believed that no man could change, that a man made by violence could only spread violence. She told me of the first night she ran, barefoot and bleeding, believing she wouldn't see the sunrise, and how every sunrise after that felt borrowed. One night, as the fire crackled low, she asked me if I believed men could be forgiven. I told her forgiveness wasn't something I'd ever sought. Redemption maybe, but forgiveness? That felt like a word for softer people, people who hadn't done the things I had. But she only nodded, as if she understood, and didn't ask again. Our path curved westward, deeper into mountains older than memory. The snow gave way to mud and rock, but danger never eased. The men who hunted her were patient, cruel, and well paid. We caught glimpses, a curl of smoke where no camp should be, hoofprints in fresh mud, the distant echo of laughter that froze the blood. They were close, too close. One morning, we came to a narrow pass, cliffs rising on either side, the kind of place made for an ambush. I stopped, scanning the heights, hand resting on my rifle. She waited behind, quiet as ever, trusting my judgment more than I trusted it myself. A stone clattered above, falling down the cliff face. I raised the rifle, breath held tight, but nothing followed, just wind whistling through stone and the scent of pine. We crossed without incident, but the silence on the other side felt heavier, as if danger had only chosen to wait. That night I lay awake, staring into the dying embers, and realized how little separated us from the men who hunted us. A single moment of weakness, a wrong turn, a slip on the icy, and all her running, all our fighting, would come to nothing. She must have sensed my thoughts, because she spoke then, voice soft, barely louder than the crackle of the fire. "If they catch us," she said, "don't let them take me alive." I turned to look at her, and in her eyes, I saw no fear in the resolve, the same quiet strength that had carried her through horror I could barely imagine. "I won't," I promised, and I meant it. God help me, I meant it. But promises weigh heavy, and as sleep claimed her, I sat there, rifle across my knees, wondering what it meant to kill to save someone and whether that would damn what little soul I had left. Days stretched into weeks. We rode from dawn to dusk, slept where we could, never lighting fires high enough to give away our position. Hunger gnawed at us again, but so did exhaustion, the kind that seeped into bones and made every mile feel twice as long. Once we stumbled on an abandoned homestead, rotted walls, roof half collapsed, but inside, a trunk left behind. She opened it first, hands gentle, as if afraid of what memory might spill out. Inside were a child's shoes, small and scuffed, and a yellowed scrap of cloth that might have been a doll's dress. She traced the stitches with a tenderness that made something tighten in my chest. We took nothing, left it all untouched. Some ghosts, we decided, deserved to rest. Another time, we forded a river so cold it felt like knives biting into flesh. She nearly slipped. I grabbed her arm, felt the bone beneath skin that had known too much bruising. She didn't thank me, but her eyes met mine, and that was enough. A spring teased the edges of winter, Life returned to the land. Buds on branches, streams swollen with meltwater, birds calling in the early dawn. But danger didn't thaw with the snow. Tracks in the mud told us the hunters were still there, still waiting for us to falter. One dawn, I found her sitting alone, the iron pendant in her hands again. This time, she spoke. "It was my mother's," she said, "all I kept." I nodded, asked nothing more. Some truths are gifts, given freely or not at all. And for the first time, I realized that what tied us together wasn't the past we fled, but the future we dared to imagine, even if it was only a few more stolen days. A man learns to measure time differently on the run. It stops being days of the week or pages on a calendar. It becomes the slow melting of snow, the way a creek swells after rain, the sharpness of hunger gnawing at your ribs, and the moments when the wind carries voices you pray belong to ghosts and not men. After weeks on the trail, the land itself seemed to grow meaner, rocks sharper, slopes steeper, trees twisted by wind into shapes that looked almost human at dusk. And still, we pushed west, always west, chasing a hope I barely dared to name. The horses grew thin under us. Their ribs started to show, coats dulled by dust and sweat. We spared what little grain we had, let them graze whenever we found a patch of grass that hadn't been picked clean by elk or deer. More than once, I caught her brushing her horse's mane as if it were a child, whispering soft words I couldn't hear. One evening, after a day spent climbing a narrow pass slick with meltwater, we stopped early. The horses were too tired to go on. She didn't complain, just slid off her saddle, legs trembling from the effort, and started gathering wood. I tried to help, but the look in her eyes said this was something she needed to do, maybe to feel useful, maybe to feel in control of something, anything. As the fire caught, I watched the flames dance over her face. In the shifting light, the bruises faded, scars softened, and for a breath, I saw the girl she might have been in another life, a life without chains or running. That night, she spoke first. "You ever think about stopping?" she asked, voice low, as if afraid the wind might carry her words to unfriendly ears. "Every damn day," I answered, truth spilling out before I could catch it. "Why don't you?" she pressed, gaze fixed on the fire. "Because they won't." I didn't have to say who they were. She knew. We both did. She nodded, pulled her blanket tight around her shoulders. "I used to dream about a house," she murmured. "Small, nothing grand. Just walls, a roof that didn't leak, and a door I could lock from the inside." I didn't tell her then, but I dreamed of that too. Not the house itself, but the quiet it promised. A quiet earned, not stolen. The next morning, we found fresh tracks. 3 horses, same as before. Hoof prints pressed deep into damp earth, heading north before looping back south, as if they were sweeping the land, narrowing the noose. My gut twisted at the sight, a familiar bitterness rising. I'd been hunted before, years ago, after that fight left a man dead in a Kansas saloon. But back then, it was just me. Now it was her too, and that made every footstep feel heavier. We changed our course, cutting west faster than planned, pushing the horses harder than I liked. By dusk, their flanks were lathered with sweat, breaths ragged. But there was no choice. If those men caught us on open ground, it would be over before we could fire a shot. At night, the wind carried sounds we couldn't see, snapping twigs, shifting stones, the distant creak of saddle leather. I barely slept, rifle across my chest, eyes on the shadows that danced just beyond the firelight. More than once, I caught her awake too, staring into the dark, hand resting near the iron pendant at her throat. On the 4th night after finding the tracks, we took shelter in a dry gulch, walls steep enough to hide a fire's glow. I told her to sleep first. She tried, but every rustle of leaves snapped her eyes open. "Tell me something true," she whispered, voice brittle with exhaustion. "What do you want to know?" I asked. "Something you've never told anyone." The question settled heavy between us. Finally, I spoke. "I killed my brother," I said. The words tasted like rust, not with a gun or a knife, but by not being there. When Pa's temper turned mean, I ran, left him behind. He was 12, I was 16. She didn't speak, didn't offer comfort or judgment, just listened. And somehow, that silence was kinder than words. When the first light crept over the gulch walls, we packed in silence. But as we saddled up, she laid a hand on my arm, just for a breath. "You didn't kill him," she said, eyes steady. "He was failed by the same man who failed you." I wanted to believe her. Maybe for a moment I almost did. That day, the land opened into a high meadow, wildflowers stubbornly blooming among frostbitten grass. It should have felt like freedom, but my heart beat harder, faster. Wide ground meant nothing to hide behind if bullets started flying. Midway across, I saw movement on the far ridge. 3 riders, black shapes against the morning sky. They didn't charge, just watched, measuring distance, calculating risk. I tightened my grip on the reins, felt her horse shift nervously beside mine. "We keep riding," I said. "If they come, we find cover." They followed, slow and steady, like wolves testing prey. The sun crawled overhead, turning frost to mud, and still they stayed just out of range, shadows that refused to fade. As dusk neared, we reached a narrow canyon. I hesitated. The walls would funnel us in, no room to dodge if they attacked from above. But turning back meant meeting them on open ground. Neither choice was good, only different kinds of bad. "We go through," she said before I could speak, voice calm, eyes hard. "If we wait, they catch us tired." She was right. I nodded, and we entered the canyon, hooves echoing off stone, every breath loud as thunder in my ears. Halfway through, rocks tumbled from above, not the clatter of falling pebbles, but the deliberate kick of a boot. I swung the rifle up, heart hammering. A figure appeared on the ridge, rifle aimed, face shadowed by the sinking sun. "Ride!" I shouted. She didn't hesitate. The horses surged forward, hooves slipping on loose shale. The first shot cracked like a whip, stone exploding near my leg. I fired back, wild and rushed, just to buy time. Another shot, closer this time. I felt heat along my shoulder, pain blooming sharp and sudden. But we kept riding, outpacing echoes and fear alike. At the canyon's mouth, we burst into the open. I turned in the saddle, saw them still on the ridge, too far back to follow quickly. For now, we were free. We didn't stop until darkness swallowed the land. Only then did we slide from the saddles, breath ragged, limbs shaking. Blood soaked my sleeve, warm and sticky. She tore cloth from her skirt, hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. "You're hurt," she whispered. "I've been worse." I lied, but her eyes saw through it. That night, we built no fire, just huddled close for warmth, the horses standing silent sentry nearby. My arm throbbed, every heartbeat a drum of pain. But worse than the wound was the fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for me. Somewhere in the darkness, I realized what terrified me most. Not dying, but leaving her alone again in a world that had already taken too much. She slept fitfully, waking at every sound. Near dawn, I felt her shift, lean closer. Her head rested lightly against my good shoulder, and in that fragile peace, I let my guard drop for a moment. I thought of that small house she dreamed of walls that could keep the past out, and for the first time, I dared to hope we might actually reach it. When morning came, so did the cold clarity of daylight. We had survived the night, but they were still out there, and we were running out of places to hide. But even then, she looked at Menno as a man running from his past, not as a shield against the dark, but as something worth keeping alive. And for her, for both of us, I swore I wouldn't let the next night be our last. Cold does strange things to a man's mind. It sharpens some thoughts, buries others under white silence. By the time the frost bit deep enough to crack my lips and stiffen the leather of my gloves, I'd stopped counting days. Time wasn't a string of mornings and nights anymore. It was measured in the distance between us and them. We rode west, further than I'd ever planned to go. Each mile felt borrowed, stolen from men who believed the world owed them anything they want, especially people. The canyon we'd fled through still haunted me at night. I'd wake with the echo of gunfire in my ears, breath ragged, hand reaching for a rifle even in sleep. And always, beside me, she'd wake too, wordless but watching, like a mirror held up to my fear. One morning, as dawn crept pale across the frozen ground, I caught sight of her staring westward, shoulders hunched against the wind. There was something in her gaze that felt like both hope and resignation, a woman who had run so long she didn't know what it would feel like to stop. We pressed on through broken woods, the trees blackened by old lightning strikes, limbs twisted into shapes that seemed to whisper at us as we passed. I tried not to listen, but at night, when the fire cracked low, the whispers turned into memories I couldn't bury. Once, I thought the worst thing a man could carry was guilt, but running taught me something colder, the fear that even if you survive, the darkness following you might still catch those you love. The snow thickened one afternoon, swirling down in heavy, wet flakes that clung to everything, our coats, the horses' manes, the scars neither of us spoke of. We took shelter in the broken shell of an old Trappist cabin, roof half caved, but walls still strong enough to hold back the wind. She crouched by the fire pit, coaxing flame from damp wood. I watched the way her hands moved steady, despite the cold, despite the fear that had stalked us for weeks. Once, a girl like her might have shivered in a corner, waiting to be saved. But she'd run out of that girl years ago. What stood before me now was steel wrapped in bruises and frost. I didn't ask if she was scared. Fear had stopped being a conversation between us. It had become a companion we both accepted, like the cold or the hunger. Night fell heavy, the wind howling through the gaps in the timber walls. I could see her breath clouding in the firelight, could see the tension in her shoulders, never fully easing. Outside, the snow erased our tracks, but I knew it wouldn't fool the men hunting us. "They'll keep coming," I said, voice low. She nodded without looking up. "I know." That simple answer cut deeper than any scream. Acceptance, quiet and unflinching. I wanted to promise her safety, but the words died in my throat. I'd sworn oaths before, some I kept, most I broke. Better to speak with actions than lies. She leaned closer to the flames, heat painting her face in soft orange. "If they catch us," she murmured, "don't let them take me alive." The words sat heavy between us. I closed my eyes, felt the rifle cold against my palm, and nodded once. "I won't." That night, I dreamed of blood and snow and the sound of chains breaking. I woke with a start, sweat chilling on my skin despite the fire's dying glow. She was awake too, staring into the embers. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. "Didn't want to," she answered. Morning brought no warmth. We rode out under a sky as gray as regret. The snow turned to sleet, stinging our faces, soaking through wool and leather. Each mile felt longer than the last, and still we kept west. By noon, we found ourselves skirting the edge of a frozen lake. Ice stretched out like glass, wind scouring it clean. Across the surface, far off, I saw moving three dark figures, riders, the same men, relentless as the cold. "They found us," I said. She didn't ask how I knew. Her eyes were already on them, calm, resigned, but not broken. We spurred the horses, skirts of sleet kicking up behind. The lake's edge was treacherous rock slick with ice, driftwood half buried in snow. I kept glancing back, watching those shadows grow larger. By dusk, they'd closed the distance enough that I could see the glint of rifles. My heart hammered, breath turning ragged, each step of the horses pounding like a drumbeat of survival. I knew we couldn't outrun them forever. At some point, we'd have to choose to stand. That moment came sooner than I'd hoped. The land rose into low hills, pines clinging stubbornly to the frozen earth. I led us into the trees, hoping to lose them in the maze of trunks and shadows. But as we rode, a shot cracked through the stillness, bark exploding inches from her head. She flinched, but kept riding. Another shot, closer this time, the whine of a bullet brushing past my ear. I felt the old fear surge hot and sharp but forced it down. "Dismount," I barked. We slid from the saddles, ducking behind a fallen log thick enough to stop lead. I caught her gazelle steady, unflinching despite the tremor in her breath. "Stay low," I whispered. She nodded. The forest fell silent for a heartbeat, then the crunch of boots in snow, slow and deliberate. They were coming on foot now, rifles ready, sure we were trapped. I counted 3 shadows among the trees, moving like wolves, closing in. My shoulder ached from the canyon wound, but adrenaline dulled the pain. I raised my rifle, breath slow, finger light on the trigger. A shape stepped into view, a man, wide-brim hat dusted with snow, eyes cold and empty. I fired. The shot cracked the silence, echoing through the pines. He dropped without a sound. The others ducked, answering with gunfire of their own. Splinters flew, the log shuddering under impact. I kept low, heart hammering so loud I thought it might give us away. She crouched beside me, revolver in hand, knuckles white. She'd never fired at a man before. I saw it in her eyes, the weight of that choice pressing down. "They'll flank us," I hissed. She swallowed, glanced at the trees to our right. "I'll watch that side," she whispered. My chest tightened, not from fear but pride. Even shaking, she wouldn't run. The next minutes blurred into smoke and thunder. Another man lunged from behind a pine. I fired, missed, chambered another round as he raised his rifle. But before he could shoot, a sharp crack split the air. His head snapped back, body falling into the snow. She'd fired, hands shaking, breath ragged, but she'd done it. There was no time to speak, no time to feel anything. The last man circled wide, trying to catch us from behind. I heard snow crunch, twisted around, rifle ready. But he was closer than I'd guessed. His gun rose, lips curling into a snarl. The world narrowed to the black hole of that barrel. I squeezed the trigger. Nothing. Empty. But before death came, she moved, stepped in front of me, revolver raised, eyes wide, not with fear, but something fiercer, defiance. The shot she fired cracked like lightning. The man staggered, blood blossoming across his coat, and he fell without a word. For a moment the forest was silent, but for our breath dragged, disbelieving. Then it sank in. We were still alive. She lowered the revolver, arms trembling so violently it slipped from her grip. I caught her before she collapsed, both of us sinking into the snow. I thought, she stammered. "You did what had to be done," I said, voice rough. "You saved us." She shook her head, tears cutting tracks through grime on her cheeks. "I never wanted to kill." "I know," I whispered. "Neither did I." The bodies lay where they fell, dark stains seeping into white snow. We didn't bury them. The land would do that in time. Night came heavy, but for the first time in weeks, no shadows moved beyond the firelight. We sat close, silence between us no longer empty but full of something unspoken. She had crossed a line that night, a line she could never go back over, but when I looked into her eyes, I saw not the end of who she was, but the birth of who she could become. As the fire burned low, she laid her head on my shoulder, breath finally steady, and for the first time, I dared to believe we might just make it. Snow has a memory. It remembers every step you take, every drop of blood, every moment you wish had stayed hidden. By dawn, the prints of our fight were already half buried, but I knew the forest wouldn't forget so easily, and neither would we. We packed what we could. Neither of us spoke much that morning. Words felt too small for what we'd done and what we'd survived. The silence wasn't empty, though. It was heavy, full of fear, relief, guilt, and something like respect. When she climbed back onto her horse, her hands still trembled, but her gaze was steady. I caught myself watching her longer than I should, seeing not just the woman who had pulled the trigger to save my life, but the girl she must have been before the world carved scars into her. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe she could still find that girl again or build someone new from what was left. The road west twisted through ragged pines, frost cracking under hoofbeats. The horses moved slow, weighed down by exhaustion as much as by what we carried. Each branch seemed to whisper our names, reminding us of the men we'd left behind, the bullets we'd fired, the blood that had soaked into snow now turning to ice. Around midday, the wind rose, dry and sharp as broken glass. It cut through coats and memories alike, and soon the cold became something more than weather. It was a question the land kept asking us. Why are you still here? Why do you keep running? We didn't answer out loud. Instead, we pressed on, because stopping meant more than rest. It meant the world would catch up. By evening, we reached a shallow valley where the snow lay softer, gentler, as if even winter grew tired of hunting. We built a small fire under an outcrop of stone, smoke curling into the pale sky. She sat close, knees drawn up, eyes reflecting the flames. Her voice, when it came, startled me. Do you ever think about before? I hesitated, then nodded. More than I'd like. She drew a line in the ash with her finger, gaze fixed on it. Me too. But sometimes, it's hard to remember who I was before I belonged to them. Like trying to remember a face you only saw in a dream. I didn't know what to say, what words could fit into wounds that deep. Instead, I tossed another branch onto the fire, watched the sparks dance into the night. I think, I said finally, maybe you don't have to be her again. Maybe it's enough to be someone new. She looked up, surprise softening her features. And you? Who were you before all this? I swallowed. The truth tasted bitter. A man who thought the world owed him nothing, so he owed nothing back. Rode freight for men who paid in silver and cared in dust. Watched plenty fall, never bothered to ask why. I paused, the words scratching at scars I'd hidden. I wasn't a good man. Still ain't. She shook her head. Maybe not, but you're better than the ones who chased us. I wanted to argue, but I didn't, because in her eyes, for the first time, I saw not just what I was, but what I could be. And that hope scared me more than any bullet. The fire burned low. Night fell hard and cold. Somewhere beyond the ridge, wolves howled not in hunger, but as if mourning something the dark had taken. We slept light, as always, rifles within reach. Dreams came jagged, filled with faces I'd rather forget, and places I'd sworn never to see again. And in every nightmare, she was there not as a victim, but as a question. Could you have saved her sooner? Morning found us bleary-eyed but alive. We saddled up, moving westward through a land turning more stone than snow. Hills rose sharper, valleys deeper, as if the world itself wanted to swallow our story whole. Days blurred together. The sun barely warmed us. Nights bit hard enough to remind us we still had blood to freeze. Sometimes we talked short, rough words about food, weather, distance. Other times, silence was easier. But every glance, every shared fire, knit something between us stronger than words. One dawn, as light broke pale over the ridgeline, she reached out and touched my arm just briefly, a feather's weight. I turned, expecting a question. Instead, she only whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For not making me ask," she said. The words cut deeper than kindness, because she was right. I'd spared her from begging, from bargaining with the only thing men had ever let her offer, and somehow that felt heavier than any sin I'd confessed. We pushed west until the land opened into a dry basin dotted with stubborn juniper and stone like scattered bones. Here the snow lay thin, the cold more wind than ice. A river cut through the center, shallow but wide enough to drink from, to wash away old blood. We camped near its banks. At night the water spoke in ripples, whispering secrets neither of us dared to share. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at the river as if it might carry her reflection away to somewhere better. One night, after a meal of dried meat and stale bread, she spoke again, voice low. "When this is over, do you think I'll still be running?" I looked at the stars, trying to find an answer there. "I think," I said slowly, "running ain't always with your feet. Sometimes it's in your heart, but hearts can rest too." She didn't reply, but she shifted closer, warmth brushing my side even through the coats, and for the first time, I dared to hope maybe she could stop running, maybe both of us could. But hope is a fragile thing, and the world knows how to crush it. The next morning, we found tracks in the dust along the riverbank. Fresh, heavy boots, 3 sets. The Tilson men, or others like them. Men who smelled blood like wolves. They're close, I muttered. She didn't flinch, only tightened her coat. Then we keep moving. We rode harder that day, the river bending west, guiding us deeper into canyons where red rock rose like cathedral walls. The path narrowed, shadows stretching long and thin. At midday we reached a split in the canyon on way north, the other south. Neither felt safe, but north climbed into rougher ground, places no horse liked to tread. "We'll take the hard road," I said. She nodded, no protest. As we climbed, hooves slipped on loose stone, dust rose, painting us in earth. The sun burned overhead, but sweat turned cold as it dried on skin already numb from wind. By evening, we found a ledge overlooking the valley we'd left. From there we saw them 3 riders picking through the lower trail, rifles ready, eyes hungry. They moved slow, cautious. Men used to hunting, not chasing. "They won't stop," she whispered. "No," I agreed. "They won't." Night fell with us still perched on that ledge. We dared not light a fire, so we sat in darkness, pressed close for warmth, breath clouding the air between us. In the silence, I remembered something my mother once said, long before the world turned me hard. Kindness is the only thing worth carrying. I'd forgotten that truth somewhere along the way. But beside me now was a woman who had carried nothing else, even when the world gave her every reason to set it down. I turned to her, voice low. "If they catch us, I won't let them take you." She didn't answer, only rested her head against my shoulder. And in that quiet I felt her trust draw heavy, terrifying. The moon rose slow, cold light spilling over the rock. And somewhere deep inside, under scars and guilt, hope flickered again, not for escape, but for something simpler, the chance to keep her safe, just a little longer. Sleep came late, broken by the scrape of stone and the whisper of wind. But when dawn touched the canyon walls with gold, we were still there, still together, still breathing. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Some mornings come so quiet, you start to think the world finally forgot your name. But the silence that greeted us, that dawn wasn't kindness, it was warning. A hush too complete, as if even the canyon walls were holding their breath. We saddled the horses at first light. Frost clung to their manes, and our breath came in pale clouds that vanished as quickly as they formed. Each movement felt heavy, joints stiff from cold and fear that never truly slept. The trail wound higher, stone giving way to patches of stubborn scrub and thorn. Below us, shadows pooled where the sun dared not reach. And in those shadows, I imagined the men hunting us, 3 shapes carved from violence, each step erasing the distance between predator and prey. Neither of us spoke much. Words felt brittle, like they might break under the weight of what waited ahead. But glances passed between us, questions, reassurances, confessions we had no time to voice. Around midday, the wind rose sharp and cold, cutting through coats and skin alike. It carried the smell of iron and earth, the scent of a land old enough to remember every story, every sin. And somewhere in that scent I swore I caught the faint tang of gun oil and sweat. "They're close," I muttered. She didn't flinch, only adjusted the scarf at her neck. The way her fingers shook was the only betrayal of fear, and even then it wasn't the fear of dying, it was the fear of being taken. That afternoon the path narrowed to a ledge barely wide enough for 2 horses. One slip would send us crashing into the gorge below, a drop steep enough to break bone and bury secrets alike. I led my mare slow, each hoof finding a precarious hold. Behind me I could hear her breath quicken, the scrape of stone under her horse's shoes. Halfway across, a pebble skittered off the edge, falling until the sound died. I forced myself not to look down. Instead, I glanced back at her. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold, eyes fixed forward, jaw clenched tight. "You're doing fine," I said, voice low. She didn't answer, but the tightness in her shoulders eased just a little. When we finally reached solid ground, I dismounted, and offered my hand. She hesitated, a reflex born from years of men's hands meaning nothing but pain, but took it all the same. For a brief moment, warmth passed between us, stronger than the winter sun. We set camp under an overhang of rock, fire kept small and hidden. Smoke curled into the darkening sky, too thin to betray our presence. Night wrapped the canyon in deep shadow, stars winking cold and distant overhead. She sat close, her coat drawn tight, eyes reflecting the flames. "I used to pray," she said quietly, "when I was young. Thought maybe someone up there might hear me." "And now?" I asked. "Now I pray to no one," she whispered. "But sometimes I think someone still listens." I wanted to tell her that maybe someone did, but all I managed was a nod, the words catching in my throat. Because the truth was, I'd stopped praying long ago, not because I didn't believe, but because I didn't think I deserved to be heard. The fire burned low, embers painting her face in soft red light. And in that glow, I saw the scars she rarely let me see. A thin line along her jaw, another behind her ear, the shadows of bruises long faded but never truly gone. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she asked. "No," I said honestly, "but you learn to live past it." She nodded slowly, as if turning the words over in her mind. "Past it," she repeated, almost like a promise to herself. We didn't speak after that. Instead, we let the fire speak for us, its crackle filling the spaces words couldn't reach. When dawn came, the sky was the pale gray of old bone. Frost rimed our saddles, and the horses snorted clouds into the air. We moved out before the sun could rise enough to cast shadows long enough to point the way. The canyon widened ahead, opening into a stretch of scrub and low stone. But the openness brought its own danger. Here, there was nowhere to hide. By midday, we saw the tracks again. 3 horses, heavy shod, moving faster than before. Closer, I could almost feel the heat of their breath on the back of my neck. "They're gaining," I said. She glanced at the tracks, then back at me. Her expression was calm, almost too calm. "Then we keep moving." Her words sounded brave, but I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. Days of hard riding, nights of half sleep. Fear eats its strength faster than hunger. As the sun dipped west, we found a shallow cave carved into the canyon wall. It wasn't much, but it offered shelter from the wind and a chance to catch breath. We tethered the horses just inside, out of sight. In the failing light, she slumped against the rock, breath ragged. "How much longer can we run?" "As long as we have to," I said. She looked at me, eyes searching. "And after?" "Then we stop running," I said, though the words felt hollow even to me. Silence settled between us, thick as the dust on the cave floor. I sat beside her, shoulder brushing hers. The contact was slight, but it steadied something in both of us. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon, carrying sand and memory alike. I closed my eyes and saw faces men I'd left behind, roads I'd ridden, choices I'd buried, and beside them, her face, fierce, fragile, impossibly stubborn. In that dark, words I'd never meant to speak slipped out. "When I first saw you, I thought you'd get me killed." She didn't move, but I felt her breath catch. "And now?" "Now I think you're the only reason I'm still alive," I admitted. She was quiet for a long time. Then, in a voice barely louder than the wind, she said, "Me too." The admission hung between us, raw and unvarnished. No promises, no plans, just truth. When morning came, the tracks were closer still, fresh enough that the prints cut sharp through the dust, as if the men had passed less than an hour before. "We can't outpace them anymore," I said. "Then what?" she asked. "Then we stand," I said, the words tasting like iron. She didn't argue, only nodded, jaw set. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't just someone I was trying to protect. She was someone who would fight beside me. We found a rise above a narrow bend in the Canyona place, where 3 men would have to come single file. I set my rifle across a stone, the barrel steady despite the tremor in my hands. She checked her revolver, fingers brushing the grip with a familiarity that still felt new. The sun climbed higher, shadows shrinking. Each heartbeat felt loud enough to betray us. And all the while, the canyon whispered around us, wind against stone, dust swirling in slow circles, the world turning whether we lived or died. Finally, we saw them, three riders picking their way along the canyon floor, rifles across saddles, eyes scanning the stone above. "They don't know we're here yet," I whispered. "Then let's keep it that way," she replied, voice calm. I breathed out, sighted down the barrel, felt the weight of every choice that had led here, and beside me she did the same. For a heartbeat, we weren't prey, we weren't fugitives, we were two souls who refused to run anymore. The wind stilled, dust settled, and the world held its breath with us. Then, as the lead rider passed below, I squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed off the canyon walls, sharper than I remembered. Then, silence pressed down a stillness so deep it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. The lead rider flinched in the saddle, surprise flashing across his face. For a heartbeat, he hung there, caught between balance and falling. Then gravity won. He slid sideways, his horse startled and fleeing, leaving the rider behind. The second man reacted faster, urging his horse forward, weapon lifting. Stone shattered near my cheek as his shot struck the ledge, grit and heat brushing my skin. My heartbeat roared in my ears. Beside me she stayed calm. Her revolver rose, hands steady, and the shot that followed sent the second man from his mount. Dust rose around where he fell, unmoving. Then there was the last one. Before I saw him, I heard him, the whistler. His low tune curled between stone walls, unsettling in its quiet certainty. He didn't charge, didn't fire. Instead, he moved carefully, eyes searching the ridgeline, melody never breaking. My palms felt slick against the rifle stock. I tried to steady my breath, waiting. Just one more, I told myself. But he was careful, slipping off his horse and vanishing behind a rock outcropping, his tune making it impossible to tell exactly where he stood. Beside me, she tensed, revolver ready. "He's circling," I whispered. She nodded, fear flashing, then fading into resolve. "What do we do?" "We split. Keep him in sight." She moved off, boots scuffing stone as she looped around. I went the other way, every step cautious. The air tasted dry, the canyon closing in. Then, a glimpsy corner of his coat as he moved higher. I raised my rifle, but he slipped behind rock again. "Come on," I breathed. The waiting stretched, each second taut. Then a voice, low and edged with mockery. "Think you can hide from me, boy?" It came from my left. Before I fully turned, something crashed into my side, knocking breath from my lungs. The rifle slipped from my grip, rattling on stone. He was close now, his grip at my throat, pressing the world to the edge of darkness. I clawed at his arms, air burning in my chest. Then came a sharp sound closer than the canyon echoes. Surprise widened his eyes, his hold loosened. Behind him, she stood with her revolver raised, smoke faint around the barrel. I pulled air back into my lungs as he turned, weapon lifting toward her. "No!" My voice tore free as I surged forward. My hand closed on a stone, heavy in my grip. I brought it down with everything I had. His humming fell silent. He crumpled, and for a moment only dust and ragged breathing filled the canyon. She met my gaze, her chest rising and falling. "Are you all right?" "I will be," I managed, each breath sharp. "You?" She nodded once, though her fingers trembled faintly. "I thought you were gone," she said softly. I reached out, my hand brushing her arm. "Not today." Silence returned, deeper than before. Around us, the canyon walls stood quiet, save for the restless horses in the distance. "He was the last," I said, though doubt lingered. Her gaze swept the stone and shadow. "Then it's over?" "For now," I answered. "They could send more." She took a breath, steadying herself. "Then we keep going." Her words were quiet, but there was steel beneath them, and in that moment I saw her not as someone I had to protect, but as someone who had chosen to fight beside me. We climbed back to the ledge, gathered what little we had, My rifle barrel was dented from the fall, the stock scratched and chipped, but it still felt like part of my arm. As we rode out of the canyon, the wind picked up, tugging at coats and hair. Dust swirled in small, stubborn spirals. Behind us, the trail vanished into shadow. We didn't speak for a long time. Words felt thin after what we just survived. By dusk, we reached a narrow pass leading west. The sun burned low, painting the rocks in red and gold. The silence between us wasn't fear anymore. It felt like something earned. Finally, she spoke, voice barely louder than the wind. "Back there, when you swung that rock, I thought I couldn't let him hurt you," I said, the words coming easier than I expected. She looked at me then, truly looked, and for the first time, I saw something other than fear in her gaze. Trust, maybe even hope. We made camp on a rise overlooking the pass. The fire was small, half hidden by stones. The wind cut cold, but we sat close, warmth shared in silence. She traced a finger along the scars on her wrist, gaze distant. "All my life," she murmured, "men took things from me. My name, my body, my hope." I listened, the crackle of the fire filling the spaces where words failed. "But today," she swallowed, voice rough. "Today, I took something back." "You did," I said softly, "and no one can take that from you." She nodded, breath hitching. A tear slipped free, catching the firelight. She didn't wipe it away. We sat there until the stars wheeled overhead, until the fire burned down to coals. And in that quiet, I realized something had changed not just around us, but inside us. We weren't running from something anymore. We were running towards something. I didn't know where the road ahead would lead, whether to safety or another fight. But for the first time, that didn't matter. What mattered was that we'd face it together. At dawn, as the first light touched the canyon rim, we mounted up. The horses shifted, eager to move. She glanced at me, a question unspoken. I nodded. "Let's go," I said. And we rode west, leaving blood and ghosts behind, toward whatever waited beyond the next bend. We rode west for days without seeing another soul. The wind carried only dust and the distant cry of hawks, and each dawn felt like a small gift, proof that we'd made it through another night. Somewhere beyond the endless rock and scrub, the world must have kept turning. Men traded, prayed, fought, built new fences over old graves. But out here, it felt as if time itself had paused, leaving only the two of us and the quiet ache of old wounds. The first few nights, we barely spoke. Fear had become such a constant companion that its sudden absence felt wrong, like missing a limb. At the campfire, I'd catch her staring into the flames, brow furrowed, as if she was waiting for the crack of a branch, the whistle of a bullet. And I'd sit opposite, rifle across my knees, listening to the dark until my eyes burned. On the fourth night, I noticed something. The way her shoulders eased, only slightly, when she thought I wasn't looking, as if, slowly, she was learning to trust the silence. And in truth, so was I. By the time we reached the high plateau where the pines thinned and the wind smelled of snow, we had begun to speak again, not of what we'd done, but of what might come next. "Do you think," she asked one evening, voice low, "it's possible to live without looking over your shoulder?" I hesitated before answering. "I think," I said, "it's possible to look forward more than you look back. Maybe that's close enough." She seemed to turn this over in her mind, staring past me into the dusk. The wind tugged at her hair, catching a few strands of silver in the firelight, remnants of frost or fear. I couldn't tell, but she didn't argue. We made camp near a small creek that had cut its way through the rock over centuries. The water was clear and bitingly cold, and for the first time in weeks, we washed properly. Watching her kneel by the water, sleeves rolled up, I saw not just the scars that spoke of what had been done to her, but also the strength in the set of her shoulders, the stubborn life that refused to be crushed. When she caught me looking, she didn't flinch. Instead, she held my gaze, eyes steady. Neither of us spoke, but something passed between us, a quiet understanding that words would have only cheapened. Later, wrapped in blankets beneath a sky sharp with stars, she spoke of the place she dreamed of. A cabin, she said softly. Not big, just enough room to stand without ducking. A stove, maybe, and quiet. Quiet's worth more than gold, I agreed. And land, she added almost shyly. Not to own, but to belong to. To wake up and see the same trees each morning, the same creek. I could see it as she spoke, the walls of rough-hewn timber, smoke rising from the chimney, the hush of snow falling outside, a place not marked on any map where men like Tilson's could never find us. And you? She asked, voice barely above the wind. What would you want? I thought of all the years spent riding from town to town, of the cold mornings waking alone beside a dying fire, of scars hidden under shirts and regrets heavier than any saddlebag. I'd want, I said slowly, to stop running, to build something that lasts longer than a night's camp, to wake up and know I'm need not for my gun but for who I am. She didn't reply right away, but after a moment she reached across the small space between us, her fingers brushing mine, and I let them stay there. Days passed. The trail grew steeper, the nights colder. Once we saw smoke far off on the Arizona Ranch's fire, perhaps, but we kept our distance. We were not ready for company, not yet. One morning, frost rimed her hair as she slept. I watched the slow rise and fall of her breath, the small furrow that never quite left her brow even in sleep. And I realized, with a clarity that startled me, that I no longer saw her as someone I'd saved. She was someone I had chosen to stand beside. We found the place almost by accident, a shallow valley cut into the hills, sheltered from the wind, with a trickle of water that promised more come spring. Aspen and pine crowded the slopes, and the ground, though rocky, held promise if worked with patience. She stood beside me, boots sinking into dry grass, eyes sweeping the land. It could be enough, she murmured. It could, I agreed. That night, we decided not with grand words, but with quiet certainty that we'd stay, that this hidden valley would be ours. Building was slow work. My hands were more used to reins and rifles than hammers, and hers to tending wounds rather than sawing boards. But together, we found a rhythm. She held the boards steady as I drove the nails. I lifted the logs she could not, and she showed me how to patch a split with pitch and moss. In the evenings, muscles burning and hands raw, we'd sit on the half-built porch and watch the sun dip behind the pines. She would sometimes hum low, tuneless, nothing like the whistler's cruel melody, and I found comfort in the sound. One night, as the first snow began to fall, she spoke of her past more openly than ever before. They called me by many names, she said, voice rough. None were truly mine. Each man gave me a new one, as if he could erase what came before. I listened, heart heavy with what she did not say. But now, she continued, when you say my name, it feels like mine, like it belongs to me, not them. I swallowed hard. It does belong to you, I said softly. Always did. She nodded, the firelight catching the wetness in her eyes. But she didn't look away. Winter tightened its grip. The first true storm came roaring down from the mountains, driving snow sideways, burying the cabin walls up to the windowsill. We huddled together by the stove, sharing warmth that was more than just body heat. In the mornings, I'd shovel paths to the creek. At night, she'd mend the tears in our clothes, fingers nimble despite the cold, and in the hush of those snowbound nights, we found a strange kind of peace. We argued, too, over how much wood to burn, over whether to patch the roof before the thaw, but the anger never stayed. It was like wind rattling the door, loud but passing. And always beneath it was respect, a respect born not of what we had done but of what we had endured. As the snow began to melt, she planted wildflowers she had gathered from the hillsides. They'll come back each year, she explained, voice soft with hope. Something small to remind us that the past doesn't get to decide everything. Watching her press seeds into the thawing earth, I felt something in me, Lucina, guilt I'd carried so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. The spring thaw was slow, reluctant. For weeks the land around our cabin remained muddy and cold, the creek swollen with melting snow. Yet beneath the gray skies, life crept forward, steady and patient as ever. I watched her one morning kneeling in the damp earth, planting the wildflowers she had gathered before the snows. Her hands moved carefully, almost reverently, as if she was tending not just the fragile seeds, but something far more fragile inside herself. I realized then that the real work wasn't building walls or gathering firewood. It was rebuilding trust. Trust in the world, trust in others, and most of all, trust in ourselves. The years before had taught me what it meant to survive. But here, in this valley wrapped by the arms of mountains and crowned by ancient pines, I was learning what it meant to live. She was no longer the girl who fled through the winter storm, no longer the woman weighed down by scars, though those scars remained, both on skin and soul. Instead, she had become a quiet force, a presence as steady as the earth beneath our feet. We never spoke much about the past anymore. It was a book closed but never forgotten. Instead, our days filled with small routines and simple joys, the crackle of the fire in the evenings, the feel of worn leather beneath my fingers, the taste of freshly salted meat. One afternoon, as I patched a broken fence post, she came out from the cabin carrying a bundle of woven cord. She smiled, a soft, real smile, and handed it to me. "Made this for you," she said simply. I examined the cord, thick, strong, tied in intricate knots, the kind of thing that could pull a calf free from the mud, she'd told me once. "It's good," I said. "Strong." She nodded. "So are you." I laughed softly, a sound I hadn't made in a long time. Don't get too used to it. That night, we sat beneath the stars, the sky wide and endless above us. I thought about the years behind, about the men who had hunted her, and the life I had almost thrown away by turning my back on what mattered. I thought about the scars she carried, and the kindness she gave so freely, even when she had little to give. "I used to think," I said quietly, "that a man's worth was what he could hold in his hands. Guns, land, money, but I see now it's what you carry inside that counts." She looked at me then, eyes bright with something I couldn't name. "Like hope," she whispered. "Like hope," I said. We didn't need to say more. The silence wrapped around us like a promise. In the months that followed, life unfolded in a way that felt almost miraculous. We weren't married by law, and we never had children of our own. But together, we built something that felt more real than any title or bloodline. We watched the seasons change. The wildflowers bloomed each spring. The leaves turned gold and crimson in the fall, and the snow always returned, soft and inevitable. She taught two orphan girls from a wagon train how to weave strong cord, just like the one she made for me. I built a bridge over the creek so no mule would drown trying to cross. Our names never graced any book or church record, but the life we made was a testament to resilience. One evening, long after the fire had burned low, she caught me staring at the stars. "Do you think," she asked softly, "we'll ever be free of the past?" I considered the question. "Maybe not," I said, "but I think it stops owning us." Years passed. The quiet grew familiar and comforting. When I fell ill slowly, as the body does when the years have worn heavy, she was there, steadfast as ever. No tears, no pleas. Just a fierce determination to hold on, to keep the light burning. When I died, it was as quietly as I had lived. No gunshots, no drama, just the end of a long, hard life, lived on my own terms, beside the only person who had ever seen me from more than the scars. She buried me beneath the tallest tree on our land, marking the spot with a simple stone carved by her own hands. It bore one line, barely more than a whisper. "He chose to spare me, and I chose to live." She lived on, alone but unafraid. The years that followed were hers to claim, free from fear, free from chains. She tended the land, watched the sun rise and set, and carried with her the quiet strength of survival. The wind still carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, and the creek still sang its endless song. And somewhere in the stillness between heartbeats, the story of two broken souls who found peace in each other's company whispered on. Winter's grip had loosened, and the land breathed again beneath the thawing sky. Time had folded over us like the worn pages of a book, each chapter carved by silence, pain, and the faint hope that grows stubbornly in the hardest soil. I watched her, standing by the creek, the sunlight catching the strands of her hair, some flecked with silver now, but eyes still fierce, still unyielding. There was a quiet grace to her, born of survival and choice, one that no past could ever fully erase. I thought back to the day I found her, a ghost of a girl barely clinging to warmth beneath a winter storm. She had looked at me then with eyes that knew death's face too well and whispered a bargain that saved her life. "Please don't shoot. I'll give you strong children if you spare me." That moment was the hinge on which everything turned from cold survival to fragile trust, from running to standing still. Years had passed since then, years filled with cold nights, whispered fears, and slow building of a life neither of us thought we deserved. We never had children, never took vows signed by law or preacher, but what we built was steadier than any paper promise, a sanctuary forged in honesty and respect. Her name, once a word sold like cattle, had become hers again, not a mark of ownership, but a song of belonging. There had been storms, both outside and within. Men with shadows like vultures had come hunting. I'd fired my rifle until my arms shook, fought with a fury born not from hate but fierce protection. She stood beside me then, not a frightened girl but a warrior with scars worn like badges. But the real battle wasn't against them, it was against the ghosts we carried, the shame and silence that had long ruled our lives. I remember the night I first saw her truly at peace. We sat outside the cabin, the stars spilling like scattered diamonds across the sky. She rested her head on my shoulder, and for the first time, there was no fear in her eyes, only quiet strength and a tentative hope. "Do you believe in second chances?" she asked. I looked at her, heart heavy with all we'd been through, and nodded. "It's the only thing worth believing in." Those words carried us through the years, through seasons that changed like slow breaths. She taught two orphan girls to weave cords strong enough to pull calves from mud, and I built a bridge over the creek so no mule would drown crossing it. Our story never graced books or sermons, but it was written in every scar healed, every seed planted, every night spent holding a fire against the cold. When age finally crept upon me, and my body began to betray the strength it had once wielded, she was my steadfast guardian. No tears, no desperate prayers, just a fierce resolve to hold on, to keep the light alive. The day I died, it was quiet, as all good endings should be. No fanfare, no gunshots, just the closing of eyes that had seen too much, and a soul finally at rest. She buried me beneath the tallest tree on our land, marking the place with a stone she carved herself. It bore one simple line, a testament to our journey. He chose to spare me, and I chose to live. In the years that followed, she lived alone but unafraid. The past no longer chained her. The wind still carried pine and wildflowers, the creek still sang its endless song, and the valley held the story of two broken souls who found peace in each other's company. I sometimes wonder if that's what we all seek, not perfection, not grand legacies, but the quiet freedom to be seen and accepted, to find a place where scars are not marks of shame but proof of survival, where second chances are more than just words whispered to the night. Our story ends here, but the land remembers, and in the whisper of the trees, in the steady pulse of the earth beneath your feet, you might hear it too. A tale of mercy, a tale of strength, a tale of living. Like and subscribe if this video touched your heart, and please check out my channel for more content. Love you.